It was nearly midnight when I realized I had missed the last train. The platform stretched out around me, deserted and dripping with rain. The cold drizzle painted the pavement in a sheen of silver, and every step I took echoed off the concrete like a soft warning. I stood alone beneath the flickering lamppost, its failing light throwing long, crooked shadows across the empty tracks. I checked my watch again, even though I already knew. There hadn't been another train for hours. My phone had no signal, no taxis, no voices. Just the slow drum of rain and the low growl of thunder crawling across the sky. The air smelled of diesel and damp wood, as if the old station was rotting from the inside out. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine and began to pace, trying to stay warm. My boots clicked sharply on the wet platform. Then, footsteps. Behind me. I froze. Heart racing, I spun around. But there was no one. Only the mist of my own breath drifting in the lamplight. I swallowed, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, or maybe water dripping from the roof. Still, I felt it, that creeping sensation of being watched. I turned toward the old station building, its windows fogged with age and cold. The waiting room was locked, but through the frosted glass, I could make out something. A pale silhouette, barely visible, sitting alone on the bench inside. I stepped closer, squinting. It was a woman. She looked old, her coat faded and shoulders stooped. A small leather suitcase rested beside her feet. As I stood there staring, unsure whether to knock or walk away, she rose slowly from the bench. Then, with surprising grace, she stepped outside. We stood facing each other, just a few yards apart, bathed in the yellow glow of the lamppost. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. But her eyes met mine, quiet, ancient, and full of something I couldn't name. Then she gave me a slight nod, not to me, but toward the far end of the platform. I followed her gaze. There, down the rain-slicked tracks, a faint light bobbed in the distance. A sound like a soft bell drifted toward me. I frowned. It couldn't be. There wasn't supposed to be another train tonight. But the light was getting closer, and I wasn't alone anymore. The rain hadn't stopped, only softened, like the sky was holding its breath. I stood frozen just outside the waiting room, watching the pale outline move behind the frosted glass. My breath fogged up the pain as I leaned closer. The figure inside, an old woman, frail and still, sat hunched on the wooden bench, clutching a worn leather suitcase to her lap. Her presence felt wrong, not threatening, but like something out of place in time. Then, without sound, she stood. The door creaked open as if pushed by wind, though I didn't feel any breeze. She stepped out into the lamplight. Her coat, once burgundy, was faded into a color like dried blood. Raindrops gathered on her shoulders, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes met mine, dark, soft, filled with something deeper than sorrow. She didn't speak, just looked at me, as though she already knew me, and then she bowed. A small, graceful dip of her head and body toward the far end of the platform. I turned instinctively to follow her gesture. That's when I saw it. A light, faint, yellowish, bobbing gently on the tracks in the distance. My brain told me it couldn't be. No trains ran at this hour, but the bell, soft and high, began to chime, carried on the wet air. It was delicate, almost beautiful, and it was getting closer. I took a step back, eyes wide. The woman was gone, just like that. One blink, and she'd vanished. A moment later, the ground began to tremble beneath my boots. Out of the thick fog rolled a black locomotive, massive and old. It moved slow, too slow, yet without any sound of a motor or engine. There were no headlights, only soft candlelight flickering inside its windows, casting shifting silhouettes across the glass. The train came to a smooth stop before me. Steam hissed low, hugging the rails like creeping fingers. And then, he appeared. Where the woman had stood now stood a man, tall and lean in a dark conductor's uniform. His eyes were shadowed beneath the brim of his cap, He held an old lantern, its glow dim and golden, painting his features in long shadows. He didn't speak, just stood there watching me, motionless. The rain seemed to hush for a moment. My pulse was loud in my ears. I took a step forward. The conductor raised his lantern ever so slightly, and for a breath, I thought he nodded. But I didn't ask questions. I couldn't. Something was happening. Something that didn't belong to the world I knew. And the train was waiting. The rain was a whisper now, barely touching the platform as I stood frozen before the black locomotive. It towered over me, its metal frame slick with fog and age. No lights shone from its front. No hum of machinery, just the soft flicker of candlelight glowing from within its windows, as though 100 silent dinners waited inside. Then I heard a shift in the air behind me. Turning slowly, I found the conductor standing a few feet away. I hadn't seen him approach. He looked impossibly still. His uniform was immaculate, dark wool, brass buttons dulled by time. He held a lantern at his side, its amber glow barely illuminating his pale, drawn face. His mouth was a single line, tight and unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. Then, with a voice as deep and distant as a storm buried in the mountains, he said, "This is your train." I blinked at him, stunned. "What?" I asked. "There's no train scheduled for tonight." I checked. This line doesn't even run this late." He didn't answer. He only lifted his free hand and pointed at the open doorway of the nearest carriage. The gesture was slow, deliberate. Something inside me fought against moving, but my legs disobeyed. I couldn't explain it. There was no logical reason for the pull I felt. But it was there, strong and constant. Like gravity had shifted and the train was the only solid ground. I stepped closer. The interior of the car was dim and smelled faintly of coal smoke and mothballs. The wooden floor creaked beneath my boots. Seats lined the walls, red velvet, worn thin in the middle, like they had been sat on for 100 years. There was no one inside, not a single soul. The door shut behind me with a soft click. I jumped, spinning to reach for the handle, but the conductor was gone, and the outside was a blur of mist and rain. Then, with a quiet groan, the train lurched forward. I stumbled into a seat, gripping the edge of the window as the platform began to slide past. For a moment, I could still see the lamppost, flickering behind the fog, but it faded quickly into darkness. I tried to steady my breathing. My pulse was racing. I kept telling myself I had made a mistake. Maybe this was just some forgotten night run, a vintage tourist train, maybe an elaborate prank. And then I saw her. In the next carriage, separated by a pane of glass, the old woman sat once more. Her hands were folded on her suitcase, her eyes locked onto mine. She didn't blink, didn't smile, just watched. Then the candles in her compartment dimmed, the shadows deepened, and she was gone. My breath fogged the glass. The wheels clacked below me in a steady rhythm. I sat in the eerie silence, the mournful wail of a distant whistle curling through the darkness. Somewhere deep inside me, I realized I wasn't a passenger. I was the destination. I jolted from my seat the moment the candlelight flickered. The compartment had gone colder, and the warmth of the platform outside was a distant memory now. The train rocked gently as it rolled through a fog-covered nowhere, and every creak of the wooden walls echoed like a whisper. I reached for the door handle to the next carriage, heart pounding, but the knob didn't budge. I tried again, pushing, pulling, but it was stuck tight. My hands trembled as I turned to the door I'd come through. That one was locked too. The realization hit hard. I was trapped. Outside, I could see nothing but the blur of mist and trees that didn't seem to move, as though the world itself was frozen in place. The only sound was the steady clack of wheels on unseen tracks and the faint wail of the train's whistle, so low it sounded like it came from underwater. Then I heard it. A voice. Software, childlike. Floating down the corridor behind me. It called my name. "Leo!" My breath caught in my throat. I spun toward the sound, but the hallway was empty. just flickering light bulbs swaying gently from the ceiling, casting long shadows along the cracked floorboards. I stepped forward, slowly, my boots thudding softly on the wood. Another light blinked out, then another. The darkness seemed to move with me. My skin prickled as the temperature dropped. My breath came out in ghostly plumes, and frost crept across the edges of the windows. I rubbed my arms for warmth, trying to convince myself I was still on a real train, that this was some horrible trick or hallucination. But then I passed the compartment where I had first seen the old woman through the glass. It was empty now. At least it looked empty at first. As I leaned closer to the window, the glass fogged up with my breath. And in that brief distortion, I saw shapes, reflections, not mine. A crowd of passengers sat inside. They didn't move, didn't blink. Their clothes were old-fashioned, faded like from a sepia photograph. They stared straight ahead with blank expressions, but their reflections turned to look at me. My knees went weak. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The voices began again, layered whispers overlapping, rising and falling like a chant I couldn't understand. I backed away down the corridor, every light behind me now flickering violently. Then I felt it, the air thickening, heavy, like something unseen had stepped into the space beside me. I turned. Nothing. But the cold deepened, and I knew I wasn't alone. And the train wasn't heading anywhere I wanted to go. The corridor stretched endlessly before me, a tunnel of flickering lights and groaning wood. I moved forward slowly, my hand trailing along the cold wall for balance. The silence was thick, broken only by the clack-clack of wheels beneath my feet. It should have been comforting, a rhythm, something familiar. But instead it felt like a heartbeat, one that didn't belong to me. The temperature dropped with every car I entered. The warmth from the platform and the world I knew had long since vanished. Now it was just the train and the shadows. I pushed open the next carriage door. It creaked loud in the silence. This car was darker than the last. The overhead bulbs pulsed weakly, casting jittery shapes onto the walls. The windows were fogged over, impossible to see through. For a moment, it looked empty. Then I saw them. Rows of passengers sat motionless, their backs straight, hands folded neatly in their laps. They looked like mannequins at first, dressed in outdated clothes, their faces still and pale. But their chests rose and fell, ever so slightly, in perfect unison. Not one of them blinked. I stepped cautiously down the aisle. My footsteps were muffled on the carpeted floor. As I passed, I could feel their presence, like cold air pressing against my skin. Then I caught a glimpse of the window beside me. That's when the fear sank deeper. Their reflections were moving. Though their bodies remained completely still, their mirrored forms turned, one by one, to look at me. Vacant eyes, sunken cheeks, mouths slightly open, all focused on me. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat, and that's when I saw him. At the far end of the car, sitting alone at a table near the window, was a small boy in a tattered gray coat. His legs dangled just above the floor. He wasn't like the others. He didn't sit stiffly or stare blankly. He was looking right at me, smiling. A serene, almost content smile. But his eyes never blinked. I felt a terrible recognition claw its way up my spine. I'd seen that face before, years ago. A news clipping, a missing person report, a child who had vanished from this very station, 50 years ago. My mouth went dry. I wanted to speak, to ask him something, anything, but my voice wouldn't come. The boy slowly raised his hand and pointed to the seat across from him, inviting me to join him. I couldn't move. My legs were locked in place. Every instinct screamed to run, but I was frozen. Then the train jolted. Lights blinked out. The entire car trembled. The passengers, those still, silent figures, shifted in their seats. Not much, just a twitch, but enough to know they were no longer still. The boy's smile widened, and I knew I wasn't just on the train. I was part of it now. I couldn't breathe. The boy's stare burned into me, unblinking, serene, like he already knew what I'd do next. Behind him, The ghostly passengers remained still, yet I could feel their eyes now, see the faint shimmer of movement in the reflections, not the real. I backed away down the corridor, heart hammering in my chest like a second rhythm to the clattering wheels beneath us. My fingers trembled as I tried each handle I passed. Locked. Every single one. "Let me off!" I shouted again, pounding against a foggy window, but the glass didn't even rattle. Outside was just gray. Thick fog. Trees that never seemed to pass. The impression of motion without destination. Then I heard the whistle. Low. Hollow. And far too familiar. I turned toward the front of the train, and through a hazy pane, I saw it. The platform. The same lamppost. The same bench. The same outline of the station. The train was circling back. It wasn't traveling through distance. It was trapped in time. A loop. A memory. A death. The child stood silently now at the far end of the car, still watching me, his head tilting just slightly, curious, as though wondering if I'd make the same choice they all had. "No," I muttered. "No, no, no." I shoved at a door with everything I had. It groaned slightly under the weight of my panic, but it didn't open. My hands scraped across the handle. My breath steamed the glass as I pressed my forehead to the window. I could see the platform approaching again, slowly sliding into view like a stage reset for the next scene. I turned. The boy hadn't moved, but he was closer. The light above me flickered. I stumbled backward, slamming into the rear door of the car, and this time, by some miracle or mercy, it gave way. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just ran. The wind outside hit me like ice. My boots skidded on wet metal as I bolted across the coupling to the rear platform. Fog whipped past my face. The train was curving now, the station coming fully into view once more. My clothes were soaked, clinging to me as I staggered back onto the platform, breath fogging in the cold air. The train was gone. No sound, no light, not even the tremble of rails to mark its passing. Just silence, thick and heavy, like the station itself had exhaled and gone still. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still loomed overhead, casting everything in a washed-out gray. I walked slowly toward the waiting room, legs trembling, every step unsure. The door was still locked, but when I pressed my hand against the glass, it opened with a reluctant creak. I stepped inside. It was exactly as I'd seen through the window before. Old wooden benches, peeling paint, a single bare bulb dangling from the ceiling. The air was musty with age, thick with the scent of mold and memories. And there, on the bench where the woman had sat, was something she'd left behind, a folded newspaper. I moved toward it cautiously, as if it might vanish like she had. The pages were brittle, yellowed with time, the ink faded but still legible. The date at the top froze me in place, 50 years ago, to the day. My hands trembled as I opened it. The front page headline stopped my breath. Midnight, train wreck. All aboard perished on the Midnight Express. There was a grainy black and white photo beneath it, taken on this very platform. A crowd had gathered, men tipping hats, women holding umbrellas, children waving. My eyes scanned the faces, and then I saw them. The old woman with her leather suitcase. Standing beside her, the small boy in the tattered coat. Both smiling, both waving toward the camera. Their faces unmistakable. But what made my heart lurch into my throat was what I saw next. Me. I was there. Near the back of the photo, standing just beneath the lamppost. Same jacket, same scarf, same stunned expression. A ghost among ghosts. "No," I whispered, backing away, the paper still in my shaking hands. "No, that's not possible." But it was. I had been on that train. Somehow, impossibly, I had been meant to be. I turned and stumbled out of the waiting room, heart racing. The clouds had begun to lift, and dawn's pale light crept across the tracks. But the cold didn't leave me. It clung to my bones like wet ash. As I reached the edge of the platform, my fingers brushed something in my coat pocket. I reached in, and when I pulled it free, I stopped walking. A train ticket. Old. Worn. The edges soft from time. The date. 50 years ago. My name was printed neatly in faded ink. Leo Morvan. One way. Midnight Express. I stared at it, my hands numb. The ticket was real. The train had been real. Or maybe it still was. I looked once more toward the tracks, now quiet and still. No sign of movement, but deep inside I knew the train would come again. It always came for those who missed it the first time. And next time, it might not let go. I turned from the station and walked into the new morning, the ghost of a whistle still echoing faintly behind me.